Failing is something that people run away from and they hide away from and they're scared of failing. But the reality is that anyone who's ever done anything has failed probably 100, 1,000 times more than they succeeded. When people see another man talking about their mental health issues, that gives them the space to then be free to talk about theirs. I think that we have a duty to talk about our own experiences and say, this is my experience, and because you never know who's listening, and use that story to help them speak out and get help. We should also spare a thought for those people that we would never normally give a second thought to, because they're the people who might be silently struggling, but who still need that question, who still need that support. DV should be stopped, no matter what gender you are. There's a lot of men who are struggling, who are being abused by their partners, who are too scared to talk about it. And I think that's a really important part, because that, creates a lot of mental health issues in itself.
Welcome to Stories in Stanza, a weekly podcast bringing you real stories from creators and speakers around the world. Hi Tris, welcome to Stories in Stanza. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. And thank you for inviting me on the show today.
Thanks for joining and taking the time to talk to me. And before we go ahead, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, and OCD when I was 12. Um, I'm from the UK. I was a school refusal. I hated secondary school with a passion. And the Department of Education told me that it was harmful to my mental health to force me to go to school. So at 14, they gave me home education. And as a 14-year-old to be told you don't have to go to school anymore, I was like, yes. But the problem with homeschooling is if you don't do any youth groups or sporting groups, it kind of backfired a little bit, and I became really reclusive for about 10 years. And it was only when I came to Australia, because my grandparents were pretty sick, and I saw what Australia was like, and I was like, yeah, I really want to live here. That I actually started going on a bit of a journey of discovery and learning a bit about how our brains work. And yeah, when probably 5 years on, I got the opportunity to come over to Australia on a student visa. Um, did that 2 years, then I joined employment services, which is helping people find employment. I did that for 5 years, and then I stumbled over a course called the Mental Health First Aid course, which is 2 days, and it covers how to recognize some of the warning signs that someone's slipping into a depression, and how to have a conversation with them and how to connect them to professional help. So I started training that, and that was in 2015. And then 2019 was a good year. I was doing really well. 2020 looked to be even better. But then COVID happened, and as you all know that that was a real big disruptor. Can't do face-to-face training when there's lockdown, so I wanted to find a way where we could talk about mental health in a way that was lockdown proof. And so we came up with the idea of the concept of a community radio station that gave people a voice that might not necessarily be on radio in mainstream. They might have disability or something like that. And yeah, we just got so many people wanted to be involved in the radio station that it grew really quickly. And we've been broadcasting now for about 4 years.
That's wonderful and such a inspiring journey that you
Thank
start
you.
with a cause and then you have other people joining you and
Yeah,
kind of something very similar what happened to my podcast as well. So uh, before we get into more details about the radio, so I just wanted to tell you that personally I had a few difficult years, me and my wife both, and struggling with physical as well as mental health
mm,
issues. And when we were going through that period, I felt very isolated. I just felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to, and we
yeah,
were going back and forth to doctors and clueless about what's happening. So when we started feeling better, I had this idea that I'll share my story and I'll call it "Fail with Me." And
I love that name. I
that
really like
was
it.
the beginning of this podcast. So first thing I wanted to hear from you is that how does that sit with you? How do you feel about it? And if you have a personal story to share.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, failing is something that people run away from and they hide away from and they're scared of failing. But the reality is that anyone who's ever done anything has failed probably 100, 1,000 times more than they succeeded. I've read, lots of books and it, says, oh, the guy Ford that, invented the car, he didn't just invent a car, he failed hundreds of thousands of times and got it wrong before he got it right. And so the road to growth and to developing and learning, you've got to fail. And one thing that we did really well, particularly at the beginning, was we kind of threw people into roles and positions which they weren't necessarily ready, or they didn't think they were ready for. But we said, look, it's okay to fail, and by creating that environment where we're actively encouraging people to fail, we got the best out of people. We had one lady who was doing audio engineering and she was deaf,
Wow.
but she found ways around it and she became really good at it. And that's the thing that really motivates me is that, okay, this is going to fail, but we learn from it, and then that's how we grow.
Absolutely. I see my failures as some stories that they are trying to tell me.
Mm,
And sometimes, I have been clueless. I had no idea what this is telling me. But now I look back and I see them fondly that, okay, I didn't really fail. It was a story there, it was a learning there. And
you might
that's,
not know at the time, but in hindsight, you go,
yes,
well, that's what I learned from that. And I think as long as you can learn something, then it's okay. Look, obviously, you don't want to fail the same thing over and over again because then you're not learning from it. But as long as you're taking something from it, then you've just grown.
yes, absolutely. And in this podcast, like I have been talking to a lot of guests in the mental health and mental wellness space,
Mm,
and I feel that culturally, I mean, I come from India, and I'm now an Australian citizen, so I've been here a fair bit of time,
mm,
and I still feel in both cultures there are stigmas related to
mm,
mental health. And one of the ideas behind the podcast is that more we talk about it, the more we
mm.
can normalize it. And since you run a radio station and you have been doing that constantly for last couple of years, I want to hear your thoughts around that. Like, how do we normalize all these stigmas that we have? And if you can share anything from your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're on point there that there's a lot of stigma still. I mean, we're doing better than we were, but there's still a lot of stigma around mental health, in particular men's mental health. I think women have got a much healthier approach to mental health. They talk to each other and they vent sometimes, and but then they're able to process stuff. But men, we struggle admitting that we struggle with a mental health problem, when we don't want to tell anyone. And that really, I think, accentuates the stigma because you're behind closed doors. You don't talk about this kind of thing. And I think that the solution is we've just got to be bolder and we've got to talk about it more. We've got to have more men talking in podcasts like this about mental health and the different facets and stuff. And I think that when people see another man talking about their mental health issues, that gives them the space to then be free to talk about theirs. So I think that we have a duty to talk about our own experiences and say, this is my experience. And because you never know who's listening, and they could go, well, that's where I am right now, and use that story to help them speak out and get help.
Yes, I had the opportunity to talk to men's mental health organization based in Queensland,
Oh,
and
okay.
they are a group of therapists and social workers, and I was able to speak to their founder and get their story behind it. And this is exactly very similar to the words that he just said, that we don't often talk about it, we don't admit
Mm.
it. The more we open up about it, things will become a lot more easier.
And just the language we use around mental health and suicide and stuff like that. I think that we've just got to be bolder and we've got to talk more and we've got to encourage men to talk more. And we've got to create those environments where they can talk as well. I think Menshed do a really good job in having that space. But Menshed, I could be wrong about this, but I think they tend to be older people. So where's the Menshed for younger people? Are younger people allowed in Menshed? I don't completely know. I know that it's kind of for the age bracket. So, there should be places for younger men to go. And I've seen a few. I've seen that there's an organization called Mr. Perfect where they do barbecues. And in the barbecues, they talk about men's mental health. But I think we need more of those programs where we can bring men together.
Definitely, definitely. And uh, when I look at the awareness side of things, what I have felt in my personal experience is that we don't always know when to reach out and who to reach out to, because it you need to understand where you are, but when you are struggling, it's very hard to define what you are struggling with, especially
Mm.
if you are in that cycle of depression, if you are in that cycle of OCD,
And I think also that for a lot of men, because we feel a lot of men still feel that admitting to a mental health issue is weakness, and that they're not real men if they're depressed or whatever. And so they put on this act and they, bravado, and they pretend everything's doing really well. And I think for those guys, it makes it hard for people to reach out because, they project this image that life is doing really well. And I think, we need to be mindful, like it's Are You Okay Day. So it's a really apt day to have this conversation. Um, so, I think it's very easy for us to fall in the trap of reaching out to people that we know are struggling. But I think we should also spare a thought for those people that we would never normally give a second thought to, because they're the people who might be silently struggling, but who still need that question, who still need that support.
Yes. I want to hear from you that you touched upon like when you started the radio station, but I want to know a little bit more about it. I was looking at your website and it's really great. So, do you have a mission statement, or do you have any ideas that you are working on or you would want to work on in future, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so our mission statement is really to be able to provide um, um, an opportunity to give a platform to people who are struggling with a mental health issue or disability, and really give them an opportunity to experience media in a way that they might not normally experience, and to be in a fun environment. So a lot of the stuff that we do is around growth, around mental wellness, but it's not obvious. So if you go to a counselling, then you're working on yourself. But a lot of our volunteers say that they get huge benefit from a mental wellness perspective in because it's a fun environment. They're listening to music all the time. They're doing interviews. They're being empowered. So it's a kind of like subtle growth that people kind of don't notice, but we see it. We see our volunteers coming in, and they might come in, and they're not really sure of themselves. And then after a couple of months, they're hosting their own show, and they're just talking with a lot more confidence, and it's a really beautiful thing to see. So yeah, that's what we're about is providing an opportunity for people to grow, using media as a platform.
And the more we share these stories, people who are struggling, they get that supportive voice that they're not
Mm.
alone. There are people
And
around.
I put all our trainers through the mental health first aid training. And so, virtually everyone that's done that has been really grateful because it's free, obviously. But they learn so much about themselves as well. So which we might do a thing on anxiety, and they're like, "Yeah, I do that." And it's an empowering kind of thing to see them shine, and that's really why we love what we do. It's seeing people grow and develop, and there's a lot of employability skills that people learn. So things like confidence, public speaking, working in a team. They're all skills that they can then transition into the workforce.
Can you share these references with me? I'll put that in our podcast description.
Mm,
So anyone who is listening to this episode or looking at it from YouTube, they can
yeah,
possibly, find those
yeah,
details.
100%.
And
I can send you
yeah,
some links and stuff.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I'll put them in
yeah.
the episode description for anyone to find. So, in your experience running this radio channel, uh, do you feel that there are certain areas where we are lacking awareness, or we should be, uh, you know, expanding in those areas?
Um, I think one of the big things um, that I would like people to talk about more is domestic violence. Now, I'm part of a interagency group of mental health services, and we were actually invited to talk to one of the head guys at the mental health services, and they were saying that one of the issues that they see happening a lot in terms of presentation to hospital wards is things like homelessness, the cost of living, alcohol and drug issues, and domestic violence. And I think that DV is one of those things where um, obviously it needs to stop point blank, but there's a very different attitude towards women who are survivors of DV and men who are survivors. And we don't really talk about men who are survivors who are victims of domestic violence. So it's most of our focus is on women, and most of our focus is on men being the perpetrators. And I see a lot of men who have been abused physically, emotionally, financially, control wise, all those different facets of DV, but who would never admit to it because, it's similar like mental health. There's a stigma. You're laughed at. You're a joke if you are, if you're bullied or if you're, abused by your partner. And I think that that's something that we really should speak out more about and say that DV should be stopped no matter what gender you are. There's a lot of men who are struggling, who are being abused by their partners, who are too scared to talk about it. And I think that's a really important part because that, creates a lot of mental health issues in itself. And they don't feel free to say it happened to me. But I think they should. I think they should be empowered to say, you know, um, I think it happens a lot more than the stats show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the stats don't have enough data points to
Mm.
cover that, which is why we should spread the awareness in people.
And who's going to admit to it? That
Yeah.
who's going to say, yes, I was a victim. My partner, my girlfriend, my wife, or whatever, was physically abusive or emotionally abusive, financially controlling, or whatever. But there's a stigma attached to admitting that, and I think that's sad that we need to break through that stigma and have an open conversation.
Definitely, definitely, and thank you for bringing that up. It's interesting. I didn't have that in my list, but that now adds a new dimension to the whole
Mm,
conversation. Yes, absolutely agree with you. I was looking at some details yesterday, and I found that in young people, mental health issues are skyrocketing over
mm.
last couple of years. And is there any observation from your side on this?
I think, I've got no kind of like stats to back this up, so it's just my personal opinion. But I think one of the things that we might see in the next few years is the aftermath of COVID, which we've not really talked about yet. COVID was a disruptor, massive disruptor, obviously across the world, from a physical perspective. People worried about catching an infection and dying and all this kind of stuff. But then there's the once you get over this the physical safety, and it's to a large part gone now. But there's also the mental health stuff now. Back in the heyday of COVID, there was a big media campaign about washing your hands. You've got to wash your hands. You've got to wash your hands for X amount of seconds, whatever it was. And I think that the problem for a young person watching that, for a vulnerable primary age, early secondary school kind of age, is that if they make the connection between how many times you wash your hands or how many seconds you're washing your hands for and being safe, being protected from infection, then that's the potentially start of OCD. Because with OCD, it's like, if I wash my hands 20 times, then I'll be safe. And so I think that, what we might see in the future is a rise in OCD behavior because of that real pressure and that real big media campaign about you have to wash your hands in a certain way, you have to spend X amount of time doing it. And I think that, it's okay for us adults, we can see that and understand what it's about. But I think for a young child, and also, there were a lot of stories about kids that were like year 10, year 11, year 12 in 2020, 21, who had the last few years of their schooling disrupted by COVID. And, what are the implications of that? People getting used to staying home. So I think there's a lot of implications of COVID that we haven't seen the end of yet, and they might only come out in a few years' time.
It was very, very well said. Because I remember I heard this somewhere that even if people didn't have COVID, they were affected by it in
Mm.
ways whether like where they were aware of it or they were not. So, but still, there was an effect, and that is exactly what I was going to ask in the next question. So, it kind of relates
Then it
to
follows.
yeah, relates to what I was thinking. Definitely, I think that there are more studies that need to happen, especially with young people who all of a sudden in that age they got locked down and they uh, didn't get a chance to explore themselves well. I remember my daughter was in primary school when this happened, when COVID started, and she wanted me to take her to art classes because there was no school happening, and I couldn't find any art classes in such situation. And then I said, you explore on your own, and
Mm.
you see what you can come up with. Don't be too critical with what you're drawing is not good. Just try to express yourself and you'll see the results later. And I think that because she had the opportunity to explore, and she became quite a good artist couple of years down the line.
Well,
Uh,
that's cool. And there's lots of really positive stories come out of COVID as well, like it's not all negative. I think COVID really made us see the good in humanity, and also the darker side. So I think it was an even balance, there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it as well.
I think the best thing that happened because of COVID is that the connectivity in people somehow maybe improved. That you can feel that everyone is in the same situation. So worldwide, wherever you are still stuck, and you have that feeling. You're the way you are dealing with your isolation. Many other people are also doing that. And one interesting question that I often get from people who are listening to my podcast, it's that uh, what does the long path of our healing journey, and now healing is a interesting area, and it would look very differently to different people and their problems and such things. But what the question that I get is like, if we are struggling with our mental health, if we are doing the same day to day over and over again, and we are somehow coping with those challenges, and how
Mm.
do we come out of it, and how do we heal? So based on your maybe personal experience or your experience about running the radio, what thoughts would you like to share on that?
Think for me, one of the things that got me out of my own mental health issues was um, a lot of mental health, particularly anxiety, is where people feel overwhelmed and they're not in control of something. So something else externally of them is happening, is maybe pushing them into a position that they don't want to be in, or making them face something that they're scared of. And I think for me that once I started taking control of my life and planning and planning my my what I want to do in my future, um and really kind of working out what areas of my life I can control and what areas I can't, and saying, look, if I can't control the situation, then what am I stressing over? That I just leave that there and I just focus on the areas that I can control. And that was a huge moment for me. It is just going, these things I can't control, they're going to happen anyway, no matter how much I stress about them. There's nothing I can do to stop them. So let's focus on where I can make a difference. And also I feel like when I was depressed, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but when I was depressed, I became quite insular. So everything was about, my things that I was feeling that time, and that was all consuming. But the minute that I kind of stepped out of that zone and started volunteering or, doing something for other people, that's a moment that changed. And I think that by volunteering in whatever capacity you can, by giving back, particularly by making someone else's day, by making someone else happier, that actually makes you feel better, and that's good for you. In terms of mental health recovery, I think there's so many options, and it's really finding something that works for you. There's some people that can use medication that can help them feel better. Some people can feel better with counseling. Music is a powerful tool. Making a Spotify playlist of the songs that really make you feel empowered, and not listening to those kind of negative songs that are all about breakups and relationships and stuff like that. Just focusing on the happy songs. Um, and journaling is another thing. Creativity is really good. Even things like pets, they've actually done some trials where they've taken cats and dogs into psych wards, and the uh, people that are experiencing the cats and the dogs note an increase in their well-being when they're petting a cat or a dog. Nature as well, has its way of replenishing us. So I think there's so many things that people can do. It's a question of them finding what works for them.
Very, very beautifully said.
Mm,
And I think that gives, all the discussion points that we talked about today, uh,
mm.
a perfect summary that, what works best for us individually. And we need to find that and we need to work with it.
That's
Uh,
it. It's all about person centered, about the person discovering themselves and discovering what makes them happy, and then running with that, and that's really cool.
Definitely. And thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thank
And
you for inviting me. And the day that you picked couldn't have been a better day. Are You Okay Day is a special day where we really need to be asking people around us, if they're okay, and
yes,
look out for each other.
absolutely. And I hope that the listeners, they got that feeling that they are not alone. Uh, if they are struggling, they can seek help, and there is no shame in seeking help. And
Mm,
the healing looks very differently for everyone, but there is so much more that they can achieve. Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you, and I look forward to your the links that you mentioned. So I'll put that in the episode description, and I'll put links to your radio as well, so that people
Awesome.
can
And I'll
find
send you
you.
those links, and yeah, looking forward to hearing the podcast.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.